than half of the number that RSVP'd for this event here, so I'm going to give it another like 5 minutes, as long as our panelists are okay with that, to let more people join the call.
Yep. Bye.
Có social security của anh không nhỉ? Ở đâu?
So for anyone that's just joined, we're going to start in a few minutes, but just as a general housekeeping thing, for anyone that is not speaking, if you could please mute yourself. I think Zoom has the capacity to have quite a number of people on camera, but as far as background noise, please make sure that you are muted.
对，应该是 NA 处理的，因为我是直接。
Okay, everyone, we're just at 3:05 now, and we have a good number of participants here. So as long as Jessica and Mohini are ready,
Yes.
Do we have Mohini here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us. This is an excellent crowd. So first I will introduce myself. For those of you that do not know me, my name is Alexandra Adams. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Biological Sciences at Rutgers, Newark. I'm a member of the Graduate Steering Committee as part of our Rutgers Union, an executive member, and I'm one of the chairs of the National Student Working Committee. So I'm going to be moderating the meeting today. Just for some formatting stuff, again, for anyone that is not speaking, please mute yourself just for the sake of background noise. And as far as structure goes, I'm going to introduce our two panelists, and they will give some overview about what we're going to primarily focus on in the meeting. Many of you submitted questions through the survey, which we did go through and compile. So we're going to begin by having our two panelists respond to those questions, and then I'm going to open up the floor for any additional FAQ that you may have.
This is the 3 o'clock
So
webinar.
you can drop that in the chat. Again, please mute yourself if you are not one of the speakers, which I think I have the capacity to do. So I think then we can get started. So I will introduce our panelists. The first is Jessica Rutter. She's an attorney for the American Federation of Teachers in Washington, D.C. And we have Mohini Mukherjee, who is the Director of International Student Services at Rutgers Global and International Student and Scholar Services Office. And I'm gonna kick it over to Jessica to give some context about how the new executive order is affecting our international workers.
Thanks so much. So thanks for having me here today, and I'm glad to see so many folks have turned up, and to hopefully have a good discussion. And I'm going to share some information, some perspective. I know that this is these executive orders or proclamations, as they are can be really terrifying in terms of how they will affect our lives. And so I think it's really important to try and get information out there about what these proclamations actually do, what they don't do, the questions people have, and how to get people the resources they need to be able to kind of navigate in this really difficult situation. So we're going to try and do some of that today. So just in terms of context, this recent proclamation, the one from June 22nd, is a kind of continuation of the kind of exclusionary, xenophobic, racist course that we've seen from President Trump, that we've seen from people like Stephen Miller, who are in Trump's administration. This proclamation it kind of expands upon previous bans and previous proclamations. So you all may be aware that in April, there was kind of an initial proclamation along the same lines, but which applied to people just outside the US seeking to enter in as an immigrant. So not people seeking to come in on non-immigrant visas like F, J, and H-1B were not affected by that proclamation. There's also, the Muslim ban, the African ban, those also, most of those bans have excluded F and J visas, most of the higher ed visas. There are also these COVID country bans, right, that have come out. So we've seen that. And then we've also seen that just a lot of the consulates abroad are really kind of shut down. It's very difficult to get an appointment. Administrative processing has been incredibly long waits for people. So, it's kind of it's a combination, right, of a lot of factors that are making it really difficult. And so I'm going to talk now about what the June 22nd proclamation actually does. And I'm going to do it more generally, but then I'm going to talk about specifically how it is likely to actually affect people in higher ed and who are at Rutgers or Rutgers kind of adjacent. So the proclamation was issued June 22nd. It covers 4 different visa categories and also the family members of people who would be accompanying people on those visas. So it's the H-1B, which is generally high-skilled workers, folks in tech, faculty, some researchers. H-2B, which is seasonal, mostly low-wage workers, so people in seafood, hospitality, landscaping. L1, which is executives, so company managers and executives, so those are like corporate folks, and actually the inclusion of that category especially upset corporate America, because that's a visa that they rely on to kind of bring their execs from abroad over. And then the J1. And I know there's been a lot of concern in the higher ed space around the J1 category, but actually there's only certain categories of the J1 that are covered in this proclamation. So au pairs, camp counselors, teachers. There was a lot of fear about, what does teacher mean? Am I a teacher in higher ed? Teacher is a technical term for J1s, and it means K-12 teachers. Or that's how it should be meant and interpreted based on kind of immigration law. So there's a consensus right now that academic J1s are not covered by this proclamation. You know, again, nothing is for sure. But that is kind of how people are interpreting it. And then, as I mentioned, family members, so, you know, sometimes what's referred to as kind of derivatives of those visas I just mentioned are also covered. So for the H-1B, their spouses can come on an H-4. And then for J-1, the derivative there is called a J-2. But remember that the J's are not affected in higher ed. So who is not covered by this proclamation? If you were in the United States on June 24th, you are not supposed to be covered by this proclamation. If you had a valid non-immigrant visa on June 24th, you're not supposed to be covered by this proclamation. If you had a valid travel document on June 24th, you're not supposed to be covered by this proclamation. If you're a green card holder or legal permanent resident, you're not supposed to be covered by this proclamation. If you're the spouse or minor child of a US citizen, you're not supposed to be covered by this proclamation. I have to say, in terms of Canadians, there is no consensus at this moment about whether Canadians are covered, and it's an ongoing discussion. And so I can't really give people a definite answer on that, but it's something that hopefully we'll get some more understanding on in the next few days and weeks. There's also a national interest exception to the proclamation, and it's kind of not yet clear what the scope of that national interest exception is. It's a bit narrower than people were hoping for. I can go into detail if people have questions about it, but either way, it's likely to be pretty difficult to apply for that national interest exception and to take a while. And then there's also this kind of food supply chain exception as well, and again, not clear what that will mean. So, okay, in higher ed, who is this going to affect? How are you all who are on this call going to, potentially be affected by this proclamation? So there's 3 categories that we've kind of identified, and I want to shout out. There's some attorneys and professors who have done some really great work. Dan Berger, who was on a previous webinar for you all. And so these categories are new hires outside of the US who don't yet have an H-1B visa. So that's one category of people who could be affected. Those outside the US who won the H-1B lottery, so these may be people who kind of recently graduated, who won the H-1B lottery, were expecting to come to the US soon to begin. And then also H-4 family members who are abroad. So if you are an H-1B and you were hoping to have your spouse follow on an H-4, you could be affected. So those are pretty narrow categories. And my actual feeling is that there are probably going to be very few members of Rutgers AAP AFT who are directly affected, but obviously there will be some. And so if you are directly affected, if you fall into one of those three categories or know someone who's a member who is, I think it'd be great if you could touch base with the union and let them know, because it'll also be important for our ability to potentially challenge the proclamation from the union perspective. So another question people were asking about is kind of how long does the proclamation last? So right now it's effective until December 31st, 2020, but it could be extended, and there could be also other proclamations and rules. So I want to talk about a few of the other rules that people are talking about potentially that, you know, these are rumors, right, about what's next. You know, it's really, I think there was a huge, I'll say, sense of relief that F1s were not affected, that OPT was not affected, and it just kind of shows the power of the university lobby, and you know, to have F1s excluded, and so I want to talk a little bit about the rumors. Again, these are rumors. We don't know how true these are, but I want to let people know what is being talked about in the immigration community, in the university community, about things that are likely to come down the pike later on. So there's just some discussion of additional H-1B reform through a rule, and it would be unclear what they'd be doing with that, but potentially changing like salary requirements or other things about how the H-1B program works. So I mentioned the H-4 visa, which is the spouse of an H-1B. So in the past, or, you know, if you were an H-4, you could actually work in the US on what's called an employment authorization document, or an EAD. And there's talk that the Trump administration will try and take that away. So you will still be able to come, you know, as an H-1B potentially, but the H-4, your spouse, would not be able to work. And then the last one, again, a rumor, is that STEM OPT, that there would be a reversal of the 2-year STEM extension. And so none of these things have happened yet, but these are the things that are being talked about as things that could potentially happen in the future. And there's kind of two ways, or there's various ways that the Trump administration has done, you know, the things that they do. So, you know, you guys have heard about executive orders, you've heard about proclamations. There's also regulations, so they can kind of issue rules. Sometimes those rules allow for a comment period where they'll say, we're going to issue this rule. You know, you have 60 days to tell us whether you think, you know, the public has an opportunity to weigh in. And then sometimes what they'll do is they'll just implement it right away, and they can do that in what's called an interim final regulation, where they say, you know, this is going to go into effect immediately. You know, I think on all of those things I just mentioned, that it's very likely they will be challenged in court. And I think that this proclamation, the June 22nd proclamation, is also very likely to be challenged in court. So I want to talk a little bit briefly, because I see we're now, I want to make sure Mohini also gets a chance to talk about some of the visa questions people have. But I want to talk briefly about some of the potential litigation or challenge against the June 22nd proclamation. So if you read these proclamations, you'll see that, you know, in them they say, here's what we're relying on to kind of issue the proclamation. And so one of the things they talk about is what's called 212F, which is a part of the law, part of the federal law, immigration law, which allows the president to bar non-citizens from entering if they're, quote, detrimental to the interests of the United States. Okay, what does that mean? I do not know. It is really, really broad. In litigation about the Muslim ban, the Supreme Court said the president's power is kind of at its height when you're talking about foreign policy, national security, these are places where the president really gets a lot of discretion and a lot of deference from the courts. Now, this proclamation, the June 22nd one, does not talk about foreign policy, does not talk about national security. It's about the economy, right? That's kind of the framing of it. And so there's a thought that that this proclamation could be challenged in a way that's different from some of the other challenges that ultimately have not been successful because this is kind of a different realm where the president has less power. So there's likely to be a challenge, there's likely to be a lawsuit. I think that will happen from business because there's a lot of companies that are so upset about this proclamation. As you all know, there's lots of tech companies that rely on H-1Bs and other companies and the L as well, and some of them use the J as well. And also H-2B, and so I think that's likely to happen. And it only takes one district court to kind of put this all on hold. So we'll keep a close eye on that. And there's also opportunities for the union or for the university to get involved in that litigation to support a challenge potentially. And then on the side for Congress, I think there's always going to be a push to have a legislative response to push back on this. I don't know how successful that will be, but there's certainly a lot of anger about this proclamation. There's also the possibility that congressional representatives can do oversight, right? So ask for information and have people come and testify and answer questions on the Hill. So that's another thing that people are looking at from the congressional perspective. Again, something that the union can do, something that the university can do to push back. And then I'll say in terms of just communication, so letters, op-eds, protests, those are things that kind of will get this stuff on the radar screen. And that will potentially, build some pressure in terms of the pushback on some of this additional exclusionary policies like the proclamation. So I will stop talking. I will pass it over to Mohini, and then we'll try and answer as many questions as we can. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jessica. That was a very comprehensive overview, and I think it addresses a lot of the big questions right now and a lot of the pre-submitted questions as well. I'm Mohini Mukherjee. Thank you so much for inviting me back on this webinar series on visa and immigration matters. I'm the Director of International Student Services in the Office of International Faculty and Student Services at Rutgers, New Brunswick, and RBHS. So my office works on international student services, which I oversee, as well as international faculty and scholar services, which is represented by my colleague Asana Dande, who really wanted to be here today and would probably be the right person to answer questions based on more I think, specific questions based on the J-1 visa process at Rutgers or H-1Bs and green card applications. But she's happy to answer the questions that you have submitted at a later time, and we'll provide those responses to you. But I'm here to try my best and answer whatever questions you have with regards to international student related visa, travel, immigration matters. I'll say at the get-go, and I think I've said it at this platform before and a few other platforms over the past few months, that unfortunately there's still a lot of uncertainty, and this situation is changing every day. Really, there's still a lot that's out of our control, yet we're going to try to do the best we can to make some policy decisions that will be in the best interest of students going forward. So in terms of uncertainties, I think we're very close, but we still don't have an answer, a clear answer on the university's fall operational status. We're expecting information on that to come out next week. So that should help us address some questions about what the fall will look like for all students, graduate and undergraduate. And above that, we're also waiting now, this I don't know when it's coming to us, but any kind of visa, immigration, procedural adaptation that was allowed, any kind of relaxation of the regulations that was allowed by the government only holds good until the end of summer. So we're still waiting for guidance from the government to tell us what that relaxation will look like in the fall semester. We're really hopeful that it will continue because the problem persists and we're going to have to try and address those issues. A lot of our students are overseas. They may have to take classes remotely. So the hope is that you should be able to take classes remotely if you have to and still maintain your legal status. But we can give you confirmation on that only once we learn of these two big elements. One is the university's operational status decision, and the other, which is really not in our control, and I'm not sure what to tell you in terms of when to expect that decision. I'm hoping soon, is the government's, the Department of Homeland Security's decision on some of the F1 and J1 visa regulation relaxations. What I mean by that is, you know, in the spring and summer, the Department of Homeland Security allowed that the regular restriction on taking online classes was lifted. And you could take more than one online course per semester and still maintain your F1 status. That's really the biggest thing, and we're hoping that that accommodation will be extended through the fall, but we'll get you that answer as soon as we have it. So that was one of the big picture items I wanted to raise. As Jessica said, the latest executive order from June 22nd, luckily at this point does not impact our F1 and J1 visa holders at Rutgers, so the academic visas are not impacted. We're happy to see that, but you know, again, like Jessica said, there are other rumors in terms of executive orders or proclamations or policy decisions that might be in the pipeline, and we're keeping very close. We're keeping a very close eye on all of that. Let's see. I mean, please feel free. We're still working 100% remotely. You should be able to make appointments with your international student advisors within 24 hours notice. So please feel free to make those virtual appointments, attend virtual workshops, and we'll try to address your questions as best as we can or connect you with resources on campus. I know that another one of the questions through the pre-submitted questions continues to be, and I've seen this as a theme before, on the financial challenges. And I completely understand how difficult some of these challenges can be for losing employment or not knowing whether you can have your contract for your assistantship contract for the fall. And I'm going to get to some of the questions in the comment box as well. But just as an overview to the financial issues, there are some emergency funds available in the university, and if you reach out to your advisor, to an advisor at ISSS, we will talk to you, we'll try to figure what your needs are, and we'll do our best to connect you with those resources. I think we've been able to assist quite a few students like this. I can't say that everyone will be helped to the extent that they probably need, but we're doing the best we can. And I know the Dean of Students Office, Rutgers Global, and a few other units have stepped up to, the School of Graduate Studies have stepped up to provide some funds, and we continue to look for some of these funds so that we can support students who are in need, whether it's for tuition support or just living expenses and essential needs. And we have a question here, or maybe we'll get to that in a little as well. The other financial issues, I know that there are a lot of questions on, if you're stuck overseas, can you still be a TA or a GA in the fall? For new students, and I know this was a question as well, for new students, if you're not onboarded in the Rutgers payroll system, you don't have a US bank account, you don't have a social security number, then unfortunately the answer is no, that you cannot be awarded a TA-GA contract. Your department might be able to work with you to work out some way of providing tuition remission if that is something that they're able to do. Again, that's not a guaranteed possibility in unbundling of contracts. However, I know that some departments are trying to provide this opportunity if new students are registering from overseas for the fall semester and are not able to get their funding package. So that's for new students. For continuing students too, if you don't have employment eligibility verified in the United States, that's we can't report your I-9, then unfortunately you cannot get paid. There are also some considerations with local tax laws overseas that might come in the way of receiving funding while you're overseas, but I'd say this is still something that's being discussed by the Office of General Counsel, School of Graduate Studies, and a few other units. You should be able to talk to your department, and they will reach out to others to come to an understanding of whether you can receive your funding contract or not. But unfortunately, there isn't, I think, an overarching answer that I can provide that would apply to everyone at this time.
Okay.
Let me stop there. I think I've gone through quite a bit. Maybe Alex, you can bring up some of the questions. I may have addressed some already.
Yeah, you may have. So we can start by going through the list of questions that we collected. For anybody that's dropping questions in the chat, just know that I'm monitoring those and I'm making note of them so we can get to all of those once we go through the questions that we compiled. Just because there were so many people that were asking the same things, we want to make sure that we cover as much of that as possible. So the first question, it was asked in a couple of different ways in the survey, but many people were asking about specific travel related questions, as in related to your country of origin, how your visa is specifically affected. We will link to the Rutgers Global site, which is a resource to answer a lot of these questions that are country specific when we send out the FAQ. So for any questions like that, it is likely on, and I can even just put that link into the chat right now for anyone that has that specific sort of question. Okay, so the first one, sorry, give me 1 second. I just closed the whole thing on myself. Okay, first question. Is it possible to renew a J-1 visa by mail? You're muted.
Should I take that?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes, you take it.
Okay, so you know, so right now, visa services, unfortunately, are suspended worldwide. We keep hearing from different countries that there's a possibility that they're going to open in some places late August, in some cases October. But from what I understand, all non-immigrant visas do require an in-person application or an interview. Possibly in some countries, renewal was possible by mail, but you're going to have to check with the embassy or consulate that you apply at to see what that process looks like right now. It's possible that some countries will make certain accommodations. We just don't know yet because the offices aren't open and there isn't anything put out there. The FAQ has links to the embassy and consulate page on the Department of State website. So you can always check there to see what the status of the consulate closest to you is, to see what you can do at that location. But you cannot renew your visa while you're in the United States. So that's why the visa is something you need to come into the US. Once you're here, you have to maintain your F1 or J1 status. But the visa is the stamp in your passport that you need to renew or apply for at an embassy or consulate abroad. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, great, thank you. The next one is another one for Mohini. Is it possible to transition from F2 to F1 within the United States currently?
So yes, technically it is possible. If you're in F2 dependent of F1 visa status and you're looking to apply for an F1 and you've been admitted to a program here in the US, you could request an I-20 based on that admission, and you can apply to the USCIS, the US Citizenship and Immigration Services Office, for a change of status. Usually a university office may not be able to assist you in too much detail with the change of status application, but I know of a lot of students who are able to successfully do this on their own if there's no complications to the case. And if there are, then we can probably recommend speaking to an immigration attorney if necessary. We have basic information as well as instructions on how you can get an I-20 if the F1 is from Rutgers. So I've provided a link, Alex, that maybe you can copy and paste in the chat box that gives you instructions that we at Rutgers provide for the change of status from F2 to F1. If you're looking at it as an option at Rutgers, then I would suggest read the information and then set up an appointment to talk to an international student advisor, and we'll really be able to help you think through your specific situation.
Okay, great. We may have touched on this a little bit in the beginning, this next question, but I guess just to reiterate for clarity, the next one is also for you, Mohini. If the university chooses to be fully online, can incoming international students register as a full-time student and be paid as a fellow or TA, even if they are abroad and can't apply for a visa or social security number? My understanding from what you said is the answer to that is no for any new students. Is that correct?
Correct. That's correct. And from what I understand, there's added layers to a fellowship appointment, and that may not be possible even for a continuing student. But certainly for new students who are not on, who cannot be verified for employment through the I-9, they don't have their social security, etc. They cannot be onboarded.
Right. And just to very quickly, this isn't a question, well, I can answer this question. Someone is asking in the chat whether or not we're going to be posting a recording of the webinar. The answer is yes. You will get that along with an FAQ that we put together, so you can revisit anything that we're talking about right now. Okay, so I'm not sure, looking in the way that these are compiled about these transition of visa questions, whether it's specific to either Jessica or Mohini, so I'm just gonna throw these out and either one of you can jump in if you have the answer. So the next one, is it possible to transition from J1 to H-1B or to green card from F2 to F1 or J2 to H-1B within the United States currently? That's a mouthful, but
each of those probably has a separate answer. From the Rutgers perspective, again, I'll hold off on, I'll defer to Asanat to answer some of these questions, because the J1 categories that are not student visas, as well as the H-1B, is a university-sponsored visa petition, so immigration petition. So that works differently. And what's possible in the US versus abroad, it's really something that depends upon, are you subject to the 2-year home residency requirement on your J1 visa? So really each of those would have a separate answer. And I would rather we answer those questions specifically based on student or scholar situations. Jessica, I don't know if you have anything additional.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it's going to be really specific. And I'll just kind of stress again that if you are in the United States, the proclamation shouldn't apply to you. But, you know, it's very important to get the help that you need if you are trying to make one of those changes.
okay, great, thank you. And we may, I think a lot of people are asking similar questions in the chat about transitions from different types of visas. So it seems like that sort of information is going to be something that we will likely revisit when we're putting together the FAQ and we have a little bit more specific information. But to reiterate Mohini's point, this is likely going to be situation dependent as well. Okay, so the next question I believe is related to all of the different travel bans. The question is, what happens to our employment if we are called back to be present in the United States and cannot get there?
Okay, so what happens to employment if, that is, you have an employment offer on campus and you're not able to make it? So again, I think it will depend on what employment offer you have and what your status here is. Are you fully onboarded in the I-9 and HCM, the university payroll system? And can your payment continue with your research being done abroad? That might be a possibility, but there could be situations where the answer to the question would be a no. So I would suggest that you begin with talking to your graduate departments and then allow them sort of to branch out and check with School of Graduate Studies and our office for any visa related issues.
And the next question may effectively be the same answer, and I think we did talk about this a little bit in the beginning, but more directly, can we be paid while teaching online classes abroad as teaching assistants? And the second part of that question is, are there extensions of the 5 months rule in the fall that we're aware of?
The answer to the second part of the question in terms of the 5-month rule is that we don't have updated guidance from Department of Homeland Security yet. So we're waiting on that. We hope that there will be some accommodation and flexibility, but we don't have that in writing. They have said on the latest version of their FAQs that they will provide this guidance soon. So we're waiting on that. I think the first part was, again, to the same point about having a TA appointment, and if you can teach online, can you do that while you're overseas and get paid? That would depend on your status and the appointment you have and your department's decision. So a lot of moving parts there. If you're already in the payroll system and you have a US bank account, Social Security, etc., and the work can be done effectively online, that's what your department determines, then that's a possibility. But it's not a decision it's not a policy that's set in stone. So it's really going to have to be determined on a case-by-case basis. So you start with your department and then we'll take it from there. Sorry, I know, I wish I could answer this better. This is better than I think the last 2 or 3 times that we've tried to answer this question. We have a little bit more information than before.
Yeah, little by little.
Little by little.
Exactly. Okay, so Jessica talked a bit about this, and maybe both of you can weigh in just a bit about this and any updates. But one of the questions in terms of advocacy is, what can universities and unions do against these executive orders? And are there any legal or active actions planned currently?
Go ahead, Jessica.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think I've covered that kind of in my initial remarks, but I'm really interested to hear ideas that you all have on that, and working together with everyone here to try and figure out the best ways to kind of organize. You know, there are these possibilities for litigation and for pushing congressional representatives, but I think the kind of ground piece will be really important. So, and I will, and I know we've talked about this before. I mean, there's a bunch of organizations, right, on the national level who are doing this work. So there's a group called the President's Alliance for Higher Education and Immigration, and Rutgers, the president of Rutgers is part of that group, and they've been really leading on the lobbying efforts, putting out letters, putting out resources. They have a website, which I'll put in the chat, and they're just a great place to go in terms of seeing kind of what universities are doing to try and support international students and scholars. So I'll pass it to Mohini to see if you have anything you want to add.
No, I think you covered it great. And I too, from my vantage point, have seen quite a few efforts in which university officials are involved. I know that our Vice President for Global Affairs is the Senior International Officer from Rutgers, who's also participating in national associations like NAFSA, the Association of International Educators, or AIEA, that's for international education leaders. And again, all the lobbying and advocacy efforts coming out of there definitely have a Rutgers involvement as well. I know that our Federal Relations Office in DC has been trying to do a lot of work in just lobbying up support for international students. We have signed some letters, like Jessica has said, and some of that has come my way as well. So I see that wherever there is an opportunity, from the School of Graduate Studies, I've seen some, but I too would be happy to learn about more options and ways in which we can offer this support and advocacy and do it together. So again, I'm very much in partnership with everybody on it, but this is some of what I've heard of so far.
Okay, great. We only have a couple more questions from what we collected originally. I'm going to skip the one about emergency funding because Mohini already touched on that. So for employees, if they are furloughed, can visa holders benefit from unemployment benefits, which I think is kind of a quick answer that I'll let Mohini take.
Sure. So I've tried to answer this question on the International Student FAQ on our website as well. And unfortunately, the answer is not that great. It is that you're going to have to check with the state. It's based on your residency, and probably there's an application to complete based on which it would be determined if you qualify or not. So it is something that goes through the state, and unfortunately, I can't say a yes or no to that. Jessica, is there anything else to add?
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be pretty state specific. I've talked a little bit actually with Patrick about this stuff, and happy to continue to work with you guys to try and provide some resources on this issue.
Okay, so this is another important travel related question that we received. Are there any emergency situations that one can go back to their hometown and back with a valid J-1 visa, such as a death in the family? So I guess the question is, are there exceptions to any of these travel related rules currently?
There are no exceptions, unfortunately, that we can really support. I mean, we'll be happy to provide letters of support in certain situations. And I know that in some cases, students have had to make the decision to travel. It's a personal decision to make, especially when, something as unfortunate as possibly a death in the family or an illness, things like that. So it's still a personal decision one has to make, just keeping in mind all the factors. I think news and information is as much available to you as to us. So I think it's public information in terms of what the current travel restrictions are or visa restrictions are, and keeping all of that, given that it's this chaotic situation out there, keeping all of that in mind, whatever we can do to help support you, whether it's through a letter or anything internal that might be able to help you, we'll do. So depending on the situation, just reach out to us and we'll see how best to assist with it. But there are no exceptions that we can possibly make to government regulations.
Mohini, is it right, based on your understanding, that people might have a multiple entry visa for a J-1, and so maybe they can, like if they do have a multiple entry, that they might have the option to go and come back?
Of course. So if you have a multiple entry F1 or J1 visa, then travel and re-entry is fine as long as all the other travel restrictions are okay. So if you happen to travel to a country from where you cannot return to the US because of any travel restrictions, then that multiple entry visa doesn't help now. But absolutely, if your visa does allow you entry, then you should be fine. And if not, you have to apply for a visa, which right now is a challenge. And that's what I meant. Like, there is no way for us to go around the visa requirement. But if you have the visa and you can get on a flight and you can enter the United States, then that's perfectly okay. And I know that these are, we have to think of it both ways right now, right? Because there's also a lot of countries imposing some restrictions for entry of US nationals or visitors from the United States to other countries. So we have to consider all of these moving parts again.
Okay, and
but
just
yes,
sorry.
Yeah,
because this one just popped into the chat, and since it's related, someone is asking, how do you know if your F1, J1 is multiple entry?
It should say it on the visa.
Okay.
It should say it on the visa stamp.
Okay.
Typically it is a multiple entry visa. It's usually valid for the duration of the visa.
Okay, great. I'm going to flag time quickly just for everyone, because I know that Jessica has a hard deadline of 4 o'clock. So I'm going to try and go through, we have one more question that I'm not sure that we can necessarily answer, but I'm going to try and go through as many questions that I have collected from the chat so far. Note that anything related to conversion from one status to another, I'm going to hold off on getting into because we don't necessarily have the right, all of the accurate information for that, but look out for answers to those questions in the FAQ that we will follow up with. Okay, so the last one appears to be somewhat circumstantial, but this may be a regulation that I am not aware of. Someone wrote in and said that they know of an F1 visa holder student who became an OPT holder, and Rutgers told them that they can't have health insurance for the first 2 months of their employment. Is that accurate? Is that something that occurs, or?
I read that question and I did not quite understand how that would play out. So I'm imagining this is someone on OPT, but was hired as a postdoc or in some position at Rutgers and has graduated as a student already. So as a student, you have, while you're enrolled as a student, you have the student insurance. And then depending upon the start of your appointment, your insurance starts on a certain date. So I don't know if in this specific case, there ended up being a gap between the end of the student insurance and the start of the other appointment. But I think in any such case, as long as there is a valid status at the university, there's probably a possibility of purchasing insurance. Again, it's a very, I think, case-specific question. So I'm not sure what exactly the issue is, but if someone would like to send me an email about it, if it applies to me, I'll try to answer it. If not, I'll pass it along to Asanath.
Okay, great. So broad question, and I think I can start by answering just not to spend a lot of time on it. Do we have any idea when Rutgers is going to have everyone work on site? And I think that the answer that any one of us would give at this point is that we do not know. Right?
Do not know. Yeah. But I'm hearing that we should be getting some clarifications next week.
Okay, that's good news. Okay, next one. How does the proclamation affect DS 2019 for the J visa renewal before 2021 while remaining inside of the United States?
I think, as Jessica said, if you're in a J category that's academic, that's not impacted by the proclamation, then renewal or extension of your status, if you're otherwise eligible for it, should not be a problem. Because the proclamation does not impact those categories. Students, research scholars, they're not impacted.
Agreed.
Okay. Great. One question, someone is concerned about OPT that is supposed to start in July. They're asking if it's likely that EAC cards and OPTs will be canceled. Is that something that we're anticipating at this point?
Well, we were worried, and we were anticipating that even this executive order might have had something that would have a negative impact on the OPT, but we kind of dodged that bullet, I feel. So nothing that I foresee right away in terms of a direct impact on the OPT. And I think Jessica addressed this to some extent too, right, Jessica? Nothing yet?
Yes. No, I agree with that exactly. There is no indication that would happen. With the Trump administration, it is hard to ever say what will or can happen, but it has not happened in this proclamation for sure. And that is not what the rumors are saying, even that are kind of leaking out in terms of what's likely to come next.
Okay. Now, this is one question that again, if someone could just clarify, because several people have asked if we are aware of any relaxation relative to OPT, current F1 visa holders, unemployment requirements, etc.
No revised guidance on this right now. So it's addressed in the FAQs, but the answer to that is that there's nothing that has changed the unemployment rule. But I know that there's no action being taken on reaching the 90-day unemployment limit on OPT. So I think as long as students are doing their best, they have evidence to show that they have been looking for a job. If it's ever questioned, they should be able to provide some of that evidence and make a case for these extenuating circumstances. We don't know how much that would be accepted, but that's how we've always advised, and I think that's even more the case right now. I've mentioned this before, but you can work I know that there's a limit to working, there was a limit to working at least 20 hours a week or more. And right now, on post-completion OPT, even if you work less than 20 hours or you're working in an unpaid job, all of that counts towards employment. So the advice is try to find something, which I know is easier said than done.
Okay.
Yeah.
And oh, sorry.
I was just going to add to that. I mean, that was one of the things that, you know, ICE never relaxed. You know, there was a big push for it, but they never formally did that. And we'll see kind of what happens for the fall guidance.
Okay, the next one I think is a big one. Several people are asking about I-20s. So first question, I'm gonna kind of lump two of these together. Is the university currently able to renew or extend I-20s? And does the university still require financial proof with the same amount of money to renew an I-20 if you can?
So it just depends on what you're requesting the new I-20 for, but yes, we're fully operational. So whatever you need the new I-20 for, we will be able to issue it. So if you're applying for an extension and you're eligible for one, we can issue the new I-20 or a new DS 2019. Right now, we are allowed to issue these forms electronically. That wasn't the case before, but luckily we can provide electronic signatures, and that's acceptable at any government agency. So that works. In any case where you might need a physical copy, we'll make special accommodations and help you out there. But I would say in 95% cases so far, even more, we've seen the electronic I-20s work just fine. So we're still doing that. With regards to financial documentation, that's part of the F1 visa regulations. So at any point that you're requesting a major update or you're requesting a new I-20 or a new F1 status, you're required to show your financial solvency for a certain period. And if you're expected to be registered full-time and you're living in the US, then that amount is pretty much what it has always been right now. But say, for example, if the amount listed on a form is, I don't know, $50,000, but you only have 6 credits left to take, we will make that adjustment when you need to show us financial documents. So depending on the process for which you're applying for your I-20, just discuss it with the ISSS staff to determine what kind of finances you need to show. But regulatorily, we are required to see whatever that amount is before we can issue you the new I-20.
Okay. Next one, I'm just going to throw out an easy one. Does the proclamation relate to TN visas, and can TN visas only be renewed at a border rather than via an I-129? Do either of you know?
So my understanding is that the TN visa is not covered by the proclamation. I do not know the answer to the question about their renewal off the top of my head. Mohini?
I agree with you. I don't think it's covered in the proclamation at all. So I don't believe it should be impacted.
Okay.
No, nothing else. If we need to understand, if we need to look into the TN visas more, again, I think Asanat might be good to check with, because I know we have some TN visa holders here.
Okay, I will flag that as something to follow up on. Most of the rest of the questions that we have are related to transitions. And again, I am collecting every single one of them, so we will get to those in the FAQ when we have the right answers. So just to, really quickly, since we have to close out soon, one person is asking the basic question, is it possible to get a social security number if you get a job offer on campus currently?
Great question. And if this is the last one, then I at least have a positive answer to this one. That we were recently able to make some breakthrough with the Social Security Office in New Brunswick. We're not really making advertising this process out loud, really, because they're very skeptical about having crowds of students in the Social Security Office, but they're willing to make accommodations with specific students. You're going to have to, the challenging part is that you're going to have to mail your entire application packet with all the original documents passport, I-20, etc., to them. But very quickly, the director there is going to respond to you personally and have you come in person, and then give you a receipt notice while you're there and return your documents to you. So I have this process written out. So anyone who is looking to apply for a Social Security number, feel free to write to me. Feel free to write to the ISS's general email, and we'll send that process out to you. We also anticipate sending out a new version of the International Student FAQ sometime next week, once the university makes its announcements, and this Social Security process is outlined there as well.
Okay, great. So that puts us right now at exactly 4 o'clock, and I know we need to close. So again, I just dropped the link one more time in the chat. For anybody that has not signed in, please do so, because that's going to be the way that we can contact you to send out the recording of the webinar and information about the FAQ, where it's going to be posted, probably a link to the FAQ itself. And thank you all so much for coming and for posing so many very important questions. I hope that this was very helpful for everyone that was involved. I'm sorry if we couldn't answer any of your questions right now, either because there is no answer or because we just didn't have time to get through all of them, but we will get that information to you as soon as possible. And I wanted to very much thank Mohini and Jessica for walking us through all of these questions. It's always so appreciated. Thank you for your continued support for international students and employees. And I don't know if anyone has any closing remarks, Mohini or Jessica, but I think we can end effectively on this note.
Yes, thank you everyone so much. Take care.
I agree. Thank you. Until next time, hopefully we'll have more clarity next week.
Bye everyone, take care.
Bye-bye.